Hey guys, this is Infinite Flash here. Today I'm going to be talking about what happened in round 3 of the Sinquefield Cup. We have Magnus Carlsen playing white in this game and Fabiano Caruana playing black in this game. Caruana is playing an incredible tournament so far, and the first 2 rounds he beat Topolov and NBL in quite convincing fashion in each. Carlsen, on the other hand, drew, let's say, in a slightly worse position and eventually equalized against Nakamura. Not really clear where Nakamura could have improved, but a very, very nice draw for Carlsen and a fantastic first game for Carlsen against MVL and the draw against him. If you want to check that out, I posted that game in my channel, and I'm sure it's all across YouTube. It's a really, really famous game by now. Anyways, let's see what happened in the game. White Carlsen kicked off with e4, and he plays every opening, by the way, so it's really hard to predict what he does, any kind of variation. So we quickly get, black playing e5. This is really popular these days, and Carlsen quickly usually plays knight f3 in this kind of position, and usually you get kind of normal play. He's also played knight c3 occasionally, but in this game he played bishop c4, and traditionally what's been the problem with the moves such as bishop d4 is that this pawn is kind of undefended, and black usually, as in the game, proceeds with knight f6 attacking the pawn, and this pawn is kind of really hanging in this kind of position. It's kind of annoying to deal with for white. So white ended up playing d3. Another move that you can consider is knight c3. I think this is a Vienna game position when black has this option of knight takes e4. And after queen h5, attacking f7, attacking e5, black usually just defends the f7 pawn and attacks the bishop here. And we kind of get this forced line with in this kind of position, where black is totally fine, in my opinion, after bishop g3, getting away from this knight. I think black is doing quite alright in this position. But anyways, that's a bit of a digression. Carlsen just ended up playing d3, protecting the e4 pawn, but the problem with this move is that this allows black to play the following continuation, and as in the game. Black decided to play c6, and he's preferring d5 to take care of the center, and it almost looks like you're playing kind of an opening with reverse colors, where white is playing a black setup, and with the center being taken, it's kind of black is playing a white setup. After knight f3, you kind of, let's say, developing a piece towards the center, black just ended up playing d5, and white really had to drop the bishop back here. A move such as, let's say, pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, still maintaining this pawn center here, always leads to trouble for white in this kind of position. After the logical bishop b5 followed by knight takes e5, the problem is that black can play bishop d7, and this bishop is unprotected, and you don't really have anything better than bishop takes bishop and knight takes d7 when black is ready to maintain his center and has probably a slightly better game. I would really prefer to play black there. So usually you don't want to resolve the tension in the center just yet. Magnus just dropped his bishop back here in this position, and Fabiano decided to insert this check. Also, bishop d6 in this position was perfectly understandable, but I think his idea was that he wanted to encourage Carlsen to play bishop d2 when he would probably play bishop d6, and this bishop is not on such a great square. I mean, it's not necessary to play bishop b4, but it's not hurting his position at all. Carlsen ended up playing a move that's very common in the Ruy Lopez with c3, allowing this bishop to get one more square in the back rank, kind of in the back, and support the e4 pawn chain. And this pawn chain with d3 and e4. And then Caruana just retreated with bishop d6, and Carlsen played the very, very natural bishop g5, pinning the knight here. And, I don't really, it's probably a roughly equal position right at the moment. And, each side is kind of just developing their pieces. And in view of bishop takes knight, queen takes knight, pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, and bishop takes pawn, black has to react to this. And he kind of did this with with pawn takes pawn, first. Just making sure he's not going to drop a pawn on d5, and by resolving the tension in the center, he, let's say, can now focus on developing his pieces. And he chooses by starting by kicking the bishop first, by inserting this move, and after bishop h4, you kind of force this bishop to choose its path here. H6 is particularly useful here because you're either forcing bishop b3 to get out of, and now you don't have this pin, or if you have this pin, it's kind of stuck over here and kind of blocked in by the e5 pawn. So h6 is kind of a useful move in this kind of structure with e5 already and by black. So Carlsen ended up playing bishop h4, and after queen e7, creating this really nice diamond structure, and with this queen protecting a lot of the important squares around black's king and the center. I think black is already for preference, really. I really like black's setup here. White continued with his normal development with knight bd2. Black played knight bd7. Very natural moves. Black ended up playing the retreating move with bishop g3. I suppose black was going to go for g5, and perhaps after g5 now there could be maybe a threat with h4, perhaps. I'm not really sure, but bishop g3 seems kind of reasonable if this bishop wasn't really doing much, and black can probably go about his development after that if the bishop was here with g5 anyway, I guess. And in this position, white always has this idea of knight c4, attacking this bishop and applying pressure to the pawn here on e5. So black just decided to drop the bishop back here, and this is kind of a multi-purpose move, kind of improving the bishop, allowing the bishop can try to sneak up on this square in the future, possibly allow opening the d file now that the bishop's not here in d6, and after castles you can try to bring this rook over to d8 to oppose the queen here, kind of making use of the open file. That's probably a good move by Caruana. I really like that. White just ended up castling, getting his king out of the center, and after knight h5, followed by knight takes g3, black will gain the bishop pair in this position. I think black is doing quite alright in this position, and there's actually a nice tactic with relying on this knight being hanging, and let's say hypothetically black couldn't take here, right? I think black can actually just refute this setup entirely with knight takes e5. And you can't take here because of queen e5, and this knight's defended by the queen laterally on the square, so you would probably have to take the knight, but black has this bishop g4 move trapping the queen. A move such as queen h4 runs into g5, I think, trapping the queen again. And a move such as bishop f7 trying to miscoordinate the pieces in black's camp and try to escape here, just runs into king f8, and white's losing a queen here for a minor piece somehow. You can check that out if you want. That's a pretty cool queen trap, actually. After knight h5, I think Carlsen, Carlsen, instead of the move he played in the game h3, he can also continue with queen e2 and kind of continue normally. And, after a normal, let's see if I can, queen e2, I mean, black can probably just continue developing. And his idea is that these two knights aren't fighting over the square because this knight's going to be taking this bishop soon. And white would continue developing normally, and black would probably chop this bishop off, takes, castles, looks pretty normal, and black has probably got a slightly better position with the two bishops and possible plans to expand on the queen side with the space here, and you can find easy spots for black's bishops to be posted here. This bishop is a particularly useful piece that you can kind of reroute in this kind of position. Probably not a5, but b6 looks pretty natural, and along this diagonal, black has some pretty ugly pawns in a weakness here on the dark squares, I think. Black can also consider knight g5 in this position. And, I just wanted to show the sample continuation that kind of appealed to me. The natural knight h4 trying to take advantage of the f5 square is actually met by bishop g4, kind of skewering the queen and the rook. And if white plays the natural f3, and by natural I mean just kind of not getting into, let's say, a self pin with knight df3. So, I mean, after f3, the bishop would have to drop back, and this is kind of an interesting move that white is actually forced to play knight f5 in this position, and now bishop takes e6 is actually not a good move for white, because black has the strong move f takes e6, relying on the fact that there's not really this tactic with knight g6 forking the queen and the rook here because of the strong move bishop b6 check. And, this is quite embarrassing for white in the fact that if he goes to the h file, I think let's say king h1, right? Queen f7 now, attacking the knight, and if the knight takes the rook, we have quite an embarrassing checkmate already. Really cool. And if you go to, let's say if you go to f1, relying on the fact that, this is still hit, you actually have queen c5, and suddenly queen g1 is really hard to prevent, and this is quite embarrassing, actually. I think there's actually maybe queen c4 is forced in this position. But anyways, I think you kind of get the idea that this kind of theme is not working out for white, and probably a knight f5 has to be played in this position where takes and e4 opens up the bishop, and black has really a nice position there. Anyways, that's kind of a long line. I don't want to go too much further, but that's just one line I thought of that that gives black a pretty good game. In the game, Carlsen played h3 and allowed black to capture here. And after in this position, there's kind of white does have the pressure along the f file, which becomes very important. And naturally, the move I would have played, which seems quite okay for black in my opinion, is knight f6, kind of protecting the whole structure. And after queen e2, kind of positioning the queen better to connect the rooks in the center. Probably not rook e1. Probably keep the rook over here. And I would have tried to figure out another plan here for white, and castles, rook d1. All these moves look very logical. A5, trying to push the a pawn and gain some space. Possibly play b5 and bishop h6, and a4 is kind of logical to trying to stop this pawn push. And b5 is already a move that you can think about trying to destroy the whole structure. And this tactically just works because of after the queen eventually takes the pawn, there's the bishop a6 move skewering the rook over here. This position's very nice for black. I guess I'm not sure why Fabiano didn't consider that. Maybe he missed the little technical shot that Carlsen had after knight c5, when it's kind of annoying to me. Carlsen, I guess, got a bit lucky that he managed to get an interesting, let's say, tactical fight out of this position. In this position, white played bishop takes f7. And one idea is that if the queen takes, then I'm going to take here with knight takes e5, and I'm already threatening queen h5, and your king is going to be on the run, and black is in definite trouble here. So after bishop takes f7, black is forced to take here, and white gives this double check, and the black king starts to run in this position. King g8, and the threats are pretty serious with in this position. And in this position, Fabiano has to defend very precisely. He played queen g5, and this is a strong move, kind of putting pressure on the king side with all these moves. And Magnus continues with his very active play on the black king, and it's quite unusual that this position is actually pretty okay. At first, you might think, oh my God, black is suffering in this position, but actually after king h7, it's not so clear what to do. In the game, I think black played knight takes h8, and we saw the game continuation wasn't that pleasant for him. White can also consider rook takes h8, and after king takes g6, taking the knight back, we might see queen c2 kind of threatening this e5 move, and a really sharp technical fight might ensue with black giving this check first, forcing, let's say, the king h1 move, as king h2 might kind of just runs into this queen takes and queen h2. Black doesn't even have to play queen e3, by the way. He can also just take the pawn here, and he's already threatening queen h2, and white doesn't really want to allow that, so he has to logically play knight f3, protecting the h2 square. And in this position, since the rook is hanging and this knight is kind of protecting the square, black would have the nice move bishop g4, trying to undermine the whole structure. And in this position, I think one cool line that I saw was white giving knight h4 check, which is quite remarkable actually. And if black takes the knight here, I think rook takes rook, and queen g3 is actually running the h6 e4, and bishop e6 probably gives it gives black a pretty interesting game. And the three pieces for the two rooks and is one of the most interesting material imbalances you'll come across. And I think black's doing quite well in this position given the open king here, and it's not so clear how to take advantage of the black king here. Probably instead of taking the knight, we have this really amazing line with king g5, bringing the king up the board, and white kind of just has to take the rook over here because his rook is hanging, right? So he takes the rook, and now black gives the check here, king f1, queen h1, forcing the king to, let's say, get out of there. And after this taking, and the line continues pretty long way, and white probably has to play knight f5 as a move like such as knight f3 is probably just met by bishop takes f3, and there's annoying pressure here with queen h1 coming up and along these dark squares. We can already see these threats looming. This is not really comfortable, and knight f5 it kind of forces the bishop to move since it's just hanging in this position. So bishop takes here, pawn takes here, bishop b6 threatening the king here, and there's this long checking line which kind of illustrates kind of an interesting point where amazingly after rook f8 king here, I think, if I'm right, am I think that's actually right, rook f8 king e7, there's actually not really a good check. Queen d8 is bishop takes d8, and somehow this rook has to move, and black is actually going on the counterattack with knight e4. Anyways, a move such as queen d6 is also met with knight e6 with pretty interesting complications. This is a pretty complicated line, and that's just one kind of cool thing that I saw in this position. So rook takes h8 is pretty interesting, albeit probably not working in the end. In this position, Magnus just ended up taking the rook here, and after bishop g4, and we kind of see this theme of the rook attacking the rook and the bishop taking the queen. Carlsen was forced to play queen f1, defending this rook using the long file here with this queen, and Fabiano ended up playing in this position knight d3, a bit of a deflection kind of oriented move, relying on the fact that queen takes d3 is met by rook takes f8, and I guess one alternative that you could have is a direct diversion of the queen from the rook, and obviously queen takes e2. We kind of see this rook takes f8 move popping up a lot, and white would probably have to give this check and takes, rook takes, bishop b6, and I mean, this position is really, really comfortable for black. Probably king h2 to get out of this diagonal, and I don't know, rook takes h8, taking back the material, and I mean, I don't know, rook e1, bishop d3. This position's really, really, I think it's probably better for black. The two minor pieces, if I can count correctly, are just better than the rook and two pawns, and this pawn's kind of useless, and this pass pawn will be eventually blockaded, I think. Instead of bishop e2, Carlsen Fabiano just played knight d3, and I think he just took the knight here. One alternative that he could play was knight g6, defending this knight anyway, and his idea was that after queen e3, relying on this kind of threat here, white would play king h1, black would play queen takes g3, white would block the diagonal just for a move, and this is kind of an interesting let's just say blocking move, and I think after rook takes f8, you can't play really queen takes because your knight is hanging. Knight takes f8 and king g6, king g8, and this pawn's under threat, so white goes back to defend the pawn, and you kind of get these interesting kind of complications with knight f2 check, forcing the king to go back here, and knight takes h3, king h1, and black can force a perpetual, but I think after this kind of continuation, black would play the kind of cool looking bishop e6, and he's kind of preventing queen c4 with kind of an unusual perpetual along this diagonal, relying on the black king kind of being boxed in within this thing. And if, let's say, black plays a useless move, right, bishop d8, I think you're already running into queen c4, and this king is actually forced to go to h7, and there's no really better square, and knight f8 is already forcing an unusual perpetual. So I mean, after bishop e6, let's see if I can find it, bishop e6, white would have to probably check here, and after king h8, knight g6, white's idea is that he's got to force a kind of perpetual. He's really, really in huge trouble here in this position with all these pieces swarming. Queen takes here, not queen takes, give me a second, because this runs into bishop e6. King takes f2. Black has pretty good compensation and quite a dangerous attack for the exchange in this specific position. I mean, you can analyze this more deep than I have, I thought black has some pretty interesting ideas in this kind of position. That was the main point of this line. Let's see, knight d3. White just ended up taking the pawn here. I think this is quite a safe move in comparison to that other line we showed. And black just took the rook back, and white didn't really see anything better than just taking the bishop here. His knight's kind of sucky, and it's just trapped over there, so he just took the bishop and grabbed it. And black took back here, knowing that this knight's hanging, and I suppose that e5 is just met with g6, and the knight is still trapped. So he played knight f3, developing his knight towards the center, and possibly allowing his rook to find a good square here. And black grabbed on g3, relying on this really nice diagonal to work with him. And black's just threatening this any moment, so white inserted this check here along this diagonal first, and black took the knight. There was nothing really better to save the knight. You might as well kind of take space with the move such as e5. Black advanced with e6, trying to support his passed pawn and relying and putting his hopes into such a move. Rook e1 possibly supporting it is pretty decent. Rook f1 defending the knight. These are ideas, I mean. In the game, black first inserted this check along this diagonal, forcing the king probably to go here to h1. f1 looks absurd, given that the rook is in the same file. And after king h1, black found the really strong move with queen g4, kind of threatening queen h5 in some positions, but also just attacking the pawn. A strong move, really. And white didn't really see anything better than queen d6, defending the pawn. And there's not really much better than that, really. And black played rook d8, gaining a tempo on this queen. And this queen has to go back to a nice central square on e5 when black would gain. And there's not really another square to really go to. A move such as queen e7 is, I think, running into rook d2 when you've allowed the rook to activate. And there's no perpetual here with queen e8 because king h7 and you have run out of checks here. Queen e5 is definitely better in kind of when you see that, and you're kind of meeting, let's say, rook. Give me a second. I think I missed part of that line. Sorry, guys. I think queen e7, rook d2. I completely forgot this knight is attacking. I'm just trying to remember the line. The idea is that knight here is met by queen h5 check when this king is actually surrounded here. That's why white couldn't take the rook here, if you're wondering. I apologize for that miscontinuation, that miss. And okay, so that kind of explains why white would play queen e5 centralized than queen. Makes sense. And now black would gain the tempo on the queen, kind of forcing white's next move with queen b8 check, king h7, e7 pushing the pawn, queen h5 check, and in here in this position, white actually blundered the game away with knight h2 missing Caruana's next move with quite a nice finish, and simple finish, I mean. In this position, white should play queen h2 when the game continues after queen e8, and this is not really pretty for white, and as he's losing the pawn eventually due to a number of attackers attacking there, and black would probably eventually win this game with the strong bishop in the open position with the naked king. Instead of queen h2, white played knight h2 and unfortunately missed that rook d1, forcing rook takes d1, queen takes d1. He just missed that the king is just covered here, and after knight f1 is the only move to prevent checkmate. Queen takes here, king h2, check. Black is really on top here, as king h3 is met by queen e3. Each one of those moves, anywhere the king goes, queen e3 is going to be played. Queen takes e7, and black has an easy time mopping up because he's a solid structure here on both flanks, and he's going to be down. He's going to be up a piece and a pawn here. So, anyways, guys, not the, let's say, the most. It was pretty exciting game with Carlsen's bishop takes 7 shot. I suppose that he was tired. He was just avoiding, let's say, a slightly worse position with this move, and I think it's a good practical move. But I think the complications are in black's favor with these kind of tactics, and relying on when this e5 pawn is gone, as we saw. after with knight takes e5. These weak dark squares around black's white's king are very, very annoying to deal with. Anyways, guys, I hope you like this video. This is Infinite Flash signing out.